The courtroom door creaked open, not to another protester or journalist, but to silence. Day 7 had passed, and though the firestorm had settled, the ashes still whispered. President Ibrahim Traoré stood quietly by the courthouse window, watching schoolchildren cross the street, some with makeshift uniforms sewn by grandmothers who hadn't sewn in years. The air outside buzzed with life again. Not noise, not chaos, but resilience. Inside, Judge Alan Nikyama returned to his chamber for the first time since delivering his last televised message. He was different now, not in rank, but in awareness. In his drawer lay a thank you note from Amira, the little girl whose whisper changed a nation. On it, a child's scrawl. "Thank you for not shouting." His eyes welled up. Down the hall, Ibrahim entered through a side door, no cameras trailing. Him this time. He wasn't here for applause. He was here to close the loop. He approached the judge, not as a head of state, but as a man. Their eyes met. No words, just a slow, firm handshake. The judge gestured to a small envelope on the table. Inside it, a signed official reversal, nullifying the fine. Ibrahim chuckled softly, shaking his head. "It was never about the money," he said. Alan nodded. "It was always about who we are when we think no one's watching." Outside, the courthouse, a mother knelt with her son tying his shoes. The child pointed at the courthouse. "That's where the president became everyone's uncle," he whispered. That afternoon, in a quiet corridor of the Ministry of Education, a plan was unfolding, one not born from politics, but from people. Inspired by Amira, schools across Burkina Faso began organizing an annual Uniform of the Heart Week, where students wear anything that represents their dreams. Farmer caps, teacher scarves, nurse badges. No hierarchy, just hope. A local news anchor called it the most beautiful rebellion. Meanwhile, whispers of external sabotage continued surfacing. A young intern at the Department of Intelligence discovered a trail of encrypted emails tied to the fabricated news leak. It traced back to a familiar name, the same businessman who had plotted against the president. Alan, upon receiving the files, went silent. His breath hitched, not in fear, but in recognition of how deep the betrayal went. The same man who once shook Ibrahim's hand at an economic summit had tried to bury him. Ibrahim was briefed discreetly. His face didn't change. He folded the documents and said, "Let the truth walk. It doesn't need to run." The next morning, a press statement was issued, not from the presidency, but from Judge Allen. He named names, citing evidence, but asked for no arrests. "Justice is not vengeance," he wrote, "but clarity." The press froze. The businessman resigned hours later, citing personal health. International outlets picked up the story. Headlines read, "Burkina's Moral Revolution." The French ambassador requested a private meeting. It was granted, but no tea was served, just words. In the quiet space between reputations and reality, truth had taken its seat. Later that week, Judge Allen met with Amira's teacher. They sat on the school steps, watching the children paint murals of peace. "What do you see when you look at them?" Alan asked. The teacher smiled. "A country that learned to kneel without breaking." By the weekend, something unexpected began. A letter campaign from children across West Africa. Handwritten notes poured into the capital. "Thank you for not yelling," wrote one. "You looked like my uncle," said another. A viral moment emerged. An 8-year-old boy in Mali filmed himself walking to school in a green paper vest, holding a sign that read, "Uniform of Kindness." The video was shared millions of times. In the presidential palace, Ibrahim watched in silence. No smile, no tear, just stillness. Until finally, he spoke to his staff. "Prepare a statement." That evening, the national broadcast paused every program. Across all screens, Ibrahim stood in front of a plain wooden desk. No backdrop, no flag. He began, "This week, I saw what laws cannot show. I saw who we are underneath the noise." He held up one letter. "Amira reminded me. Justice begins. Small." Then he held up another. "And kindness is louder than command." He thanked the nation for not reacting in rage, but responding with unity. Then pausing, he said, "I wore this uniform because I survived. Now I remove it for those who didn't." With slow hands, he unpinned his jacket and folded it on the desk. "Let their memory be louder than me." Silence followed. In living rooms, people wept. On the streets, strangers embraced. But inside one compound, an old colonel watched with narrowed eyes. "He's too strong," he muttered. "They see him as something more than president." His aide asked, "What should we do?" The colonel replied, "Nothing. We've already lost." But that wasn't true. One final whisper remained. A forged document, buried deep, was found, suggesting the fine was encouraged by a foreign consultant tied to a think tank in Paris. The report surfaced online, quietly at first, then like a wave. By midnight, the consultant resigned. "We never imagined the blowback," he admitted. The judge who once sat alone in fear was now being invited to conferences across Africa to speak on judicial courage. He declined them all. "I already spoke," he said, "with my silence." On the 7th day, just before sundown, Ibrahim returned to the school where Amira studied. He didn't bring bodyguards. He brought books. And as he read aloud in the courtyard, a drone camera captured the image. One man, dozens of children, and a folded uniform placed gently at his feet. The following week, Ibrahim was approached by a delegation of local leaders. They asked if they could create a national museum of unity, beginning with the courtroom chair, Amira's letter, and the now famous green paper vest. He simply nodded. Across radio stations, hosts replayed his broadcast, calling it the speech of the century. But Ibrahim stayed quiet. Instead of interviews, he spent days visiting neighborhoods hit hardest by past violence, places where his soldiers once stood guard. He sat with widows, dined with orphans, and helped rebuild broken fences. In one town, an old man gave him a carved wooden bowl. "For the hunger you filled," he said. By now, Amira had recovered fully. She walked confidently through school halls, unaware that her voice had reignited a nation's soul. One afternoon, Ibrahim met her family in a park. He brought a gift, her drawing, now framed in glass, to be placed in the future museum. She looked at it and whispered, "Will people remember?" Ibrahim answered, "They already have." In a village gathering a week later, citizens began a new tradition. The day of the folded uniform, when no one wears symbols of status, only tokens of humility. Across the region, politicians began removing titles from their desks. Judge Allen quietly stepped down from the bench 6 months later. Not in shame, but in peace. "My work is done," he said. He moved to teach law in the countryside, where silence still carried weight. As for Ibrahim, he continued his work, but something had changed. Not in policy, but in presence. He was no longer just president. He had become a symbol of something few leaders ever reach: unshakable trust. And when asked years later why he never responded to his critics, he smiled gently and said, "I did, just not with words." The fine, once issued to shame, had become sacred. Its receipt was displayed at the National Museum, beside a placard that read, "Paid in silence, repaid in love." The courtroom that started it all was repainted. The bench where Allen once sat now bore a quote carved into its wood: "Justice begins when the loudest man decides not to speak." On a final visit to the site, Ibrahim stood in the back of the empty courtroom, head bowed. Then, placing one hand over his heart, he whispered, "May we always remember the price of silence and the gift of being heard."